To bail a stranger out of a trap, she told the biggest lie of her life in front of 200 people, and that stranger turned out to be the one man in Canada she had every reason to distrust. Adeline Prentice had not planned to attend the Morrison Foundation gala. She had planned to spend that Thursday evening eating leftover pad thai in her apartment and going to bed before 10. But her younger brother Bram had spent 2 weeks guilt-tripping her about never going anywhere, and so there she was, in a borrowed dress and shoes that fit her only approximately, standing near the back of the Royal Ontario Museum's main hall, and watching wealthy Torontonians outbid one another for paintings they would never look at twice. "Stop scowling," Bram said beside her. He was in a rented suit and looked embarrassingly pleased with himself. "I'm not scowling." "You are. People are going to think you're judging them." "I am judging them." "Try to look like you're not." Addie, as everyone who had known her longer than 10 minutes called her, accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server and surveyed the room. The Morrison Gala drew Toronto's most influential every autumn. Old money in pearls and wool, new money in imported suits, and the occasional journalist who had paid their way in just to write about it afterward. Addie was none of these things. She was a junior auditor at a small firm in the Junction, and the only reason she was standing in a museum surrounded by marble and candlelight was a restaurant connection Bram refused to name. She noticed the commotion near the east corridor before she heard it. A cluster of guests had rearranged, the subtle shift that happens when something interesting is occurring nearby, and nobody wants to be caught staring directly. At the center of it stood 2 men. One was Aldrich Renfrew, silver-haired, 60 years old, the kind of man who wore his influence the way other people wore cologne, pervasively and in excess. Addie had known his face since she was 19. It had not changed in 9 years. The second man she did not recognize immediately. Tall, dark coat, a quality of stillness about him that looked less like calm and more like a considered decision not to react. Renfrew was speaking to him in the low, cordial voice that Addie knew better than to trust. She had learned, at considerable personal cost, that Aldrich Renfrew's pleasantness was a precondition for catastrophe. "Who is that?" she asked Bram. "The one being talked at? That's Rafferty Dunne, CEO of Dunne Group. Real estate, infrastructure, half the new development along the waterfront. He's worth—" "I don't care what he's worth." Bram gave her a look. "You make conversation difficult." Addie was not listening. She watched Renfrew produce a folded document from his breast pocket and extend it with a smile that stopped several centimeters short of his eyes. Dunne looked at the document without taking it. Renfrew's smile tightened. She had seen this exact sequence before. The produced document, the smile. The moment when someone was told, in very pleasant language, that they had no real choice. Her father had been in that position 9 years ago, and no one had stepped in. "Addie," Bram said behind her, "what are you doing?" She was already moving. She crossed the room at a pace not quite running and arrived at Rafferty Dunne's left shoulder before anyone, including herself, had a complete understanding of what she intended. "There you are," she said, loudly enough for the surrounding guests to hear clearly. "I have been looking everywhere." She turned to Renfrew with an expression of courteous inconvenience. "I'm so sorry to interrupt. Adeline Prentice, I've been advising Mr. Dunne on the Morrison acquisition this quarter." She extended her hand. "You must be one of the guests." Renfrew's smile flickered, just once. "Aldrich Renfrew, senior partner at Renfrew Belfield." "Of course," she said it the way people say of course, when they mean they've never heard of you in their life. "I'm afraid I do need to steal him for a moment. There's a clause his legal team flagged this morning that requires his attention before Monday, and these things compound so quickly." She touched Dunne's arm as though they had done this 100 times. "Mr. Renfrew, it was a pleasure." She turned, and after a half-second pause, during which Rafferty Dunne appeared to conduct a very rapid assessment of the situation, he turned with her. They walked in silence until they reached a quieter alcove near a temporary exhibit on early Canadian portraiture. Then Dunne stopped and looked at her with gray eyes and a quality of patience that came not from temperament but from long practice at not wasting effort. "You're not my financial advisor," he said. "No." "You've never spoken to my legal team." "Never." "Then what was the point of that?" He was about to pressure you into signing something in front of witnesses, Addie said. Whatever was in that document, he wanted your signature before you had time to think, and he wanted 30 people to see it happen. That is not a negotiation. That is a trap. You're very certain. I've seen him set it before. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, but an upgrade in attention. Who are you, actually? Adeline Prentice, junior auditor, daughter of the man Aldrich Renfrew sent to prison for a crime he did not commit. She said only the first part. Someone who recognized what was happening. She turned to go. He said, "Wait." He had taken the document from Renfrew's hand, after all. She saw it now, folded at his side. He held it out without preamble. She read quickly. The surface structure was clean. The trap was buried in the third paragraph. A time-limited consent clause that, if signed tonight with witnesses present, would waive Dunne Group's right to dispute the rezoning terms for 18 months. Signing it here, at a charity event, with 30 onlookers, would have been extraordinary evidence of voluntary agreement. She handed it back. "Don't sign it." "I had already decided that." "Then you didn't need me." "I needed a reason to walk away that didn't become a public confrontation," he said. He refolded the document. "Thank you, Miss Prentice." 4 steps toward the exit, then. "If you're willing to hear an absurd proposal, I'll get you a drink." Addie stopped. Across the room, Bram made a face of theatrical delight. She did not look at him. "How absurd?" "Fairly." The proposal was this. Renfrew had spent 3 months quietly circulating information to journalists suggesting that Dunne Group's newest development was financially overextended. The numbers disproved it entirely, but the rumor had enough surface plausibility to be damaging, while Rafferty was negotiating with 2 municipal governments that watched the press carefully. He needed someone credible to appear at 4 specific events over 3 weeks, a press briefing, 2 client dinners, and a quarterly review luncheon, as a visible member of his advisory team. Someone who could speak competently about financial structures if pressed. Someone Renfrew would not immediately recognize. "You want to hire me to pretend to be your advisor," Addie said. "I want to hire you to do a version of what you already did tonight, with preparation." "What do I get out of it?" He had anticipated this. "I have a solicitor who specializes in financial misconduct appeals. Renfrew Belfield has been involved in 3 regulatory filings over the past decade, all quietly resolved. If you have an interest in those records, she can access things that aren't available through a standard search." A pause. "I noticed how you looked at Renfrew when you approached. That wasn't outrage on behalf of a stranger. That was personal." 3 weeks. 4 appearances, and access to the records she had spent 9 years trying to reach. "This is either clever or a spectacular mistake," she said. "Both outcomes are possible." "All right, but I have conditions." He did not look surprised. "Of course. You don't make decisions about what I say or do at these events without consulting me first. I'm not a prop." "Agreed. You tell me everything relevant about this deal before we begin. I don't walk into rooms without information." "Also agreed. And whatever your solicitor finds goes directly to me, not through you." He considered this one slightly longer than the others. "Agreed." He extended his hand. 3 weeks. She shook it. 3 weeks. Bram appeared from nowhere, holding 2 glasses of something that was definitely not sparkling water. "I've been very patient," he announced to both of them. The press briefing went well. A journalist from the Globe asked a pointed question about projected yield timelines, and Addie answered it cleanly, without redirecting. On the drive back, Rafferty said, "You prepared more than I gave you material for." "You didn't give me enough. I found the rest in municipal filings. They're publicly available." "I'm aware of that." "Then you should have had someone reading them 6 months ago." He turned to look at her. A streetlight passed over the car. His expression was, for a half second, something close to respect. "Would you have been available 6 months ago?" "I'm a junior auditor." "That isn't what I asked." Addie looked out the window and did not answer. It was Bram who found the connection, which was not surprising, because Bram had an uncanny ability to locate information that no one had thought to protect. He called on a Tuesday evening while Addie was reviewing the client dinner agenda, and said, without preamble, "I found something about Dad and Dunne's company." She set the agenda down. Bram had been going through their father's old case documents. In the original paperwork, a real estate holding company had been listed as the recipient of the misappropriated funds. The company was dissolved. The name on the filing was a numbered corporation, but Bram had traced the numbered corporation's original registration through 3 layers of dissolved holding records. The incorporator was Dunne Group, 14 years ago. "That can't be right," Addie said. "I checked it 3 times. 14 years ago, Rafferty Dunne would have been 22. Possibly not yet in charge of anything. Possibly not involved in the specific filing at all. Possibly." She could have called him. She could have asked directly. Instead, she went to the client dinner and watched him across a long mahogany table. The measured speech, the calm authority, the way he listened to people. As though time were something he had chosen to give rather than something they were taking. And she thought about her father's face on the day the verdict was delivered. In the car afterwards, she said, "Your company was incorporated when you were 22? He glanced at her. "Yes, I took over from my father at 24 when he had his stroke." "Were you signing documents before that? Approving filings?" "Occasionally." A pause. "Why?" "Aldrich Renfrew used a numbered corporation registered through Dunne Group 14 years ago," she said. "It received money that was later attributed to my father's embezzlement conviction. That was the money that put him in prison." A silence, longer than any previous one. "I signed incorporation paperwork when my father asked me to," Rafferty said quietly. "I didn't review the underlying clients. I was 22 and I trusted him." He looked at her, and what she saw was not the careful composure but something much older underneath it. "I didn't know." "You might have." "I didn't." He said it without defensiveness, which was somehow harder to dismiss than argument would have been. "But I understand why you can't simply accept that. And I understand why you've been watching me differently since we arrived at dinner tonight." He returned his eyes to the road. "My solicitor will pull everything, including anything that reflects badly on my father's company. Whatever she finds, you see first. I told you that condition was agreed. I meant it." She studied his profile for a long moment. "If it turns out the company was genuinely complicit, then it matters and it needs to be addressed," he said simply. "I've spent 14 years correcting decisions my father made badly. I'm not interested in protecting any more of them." The threatening note arrived 3 days later, slid under her apartment door. Her home address, not her office. One index card, handwritten. "Renfrew Belfield has been very patient. Your involvement with Dunne ends here, or we revisit your father's sentencing with evidence the original trial didn't hear." Her hands were steady when she photographed it. She was considerably less steady when she called Rafferty. He arrived in 40 minutes. He read the card without speaking. Then he looked at her. "This ends the arrangement." "No." "Addie." "Don't." She took the card back. "You've decided it's your responsibility to manage the risk on my behalf. You'll tell me it's for my protection, and Renfrew gets exactly what he wants. You could be in genuine danger." "So could you? Should I have let you get trapped into signing a document at a museum gala because it wasn't my problem?" She held his gaze. 3 weeks, 9 days left. He pressed one hand briefly against his jaw, the first unguarded gesture she had ever seen from him. "You are the most difficult person I have ever entered into an arrangement with. You haven't properly met Bram yet." Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile, but was clearly related to one. "I've heard enough to be concerned. We go forward," she said, carefully, "and I want everything your solicitor has found tonight." He looked at her for a moment. Then, "All right." The solicitor's documents required 3 days of cross-referencing, and Rafferty commandeered a boardroom at Dunne Group's King Street offices to manage it. Addie arrived at 7 each morning and left when the city went dark outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. On the 3rd night, she fell asleep at the table with her cheek against a stack of photocopied municipal filings. She woke to someone draping a jacket over her shoulders. In the groggy half-second before she was fully conscious, she said something she only realized afterward she had said out loud. "You're less impossible than I thought you'd be." Rafferty, standing approximately 2 feet away, said nothing. She sat up quickly. The jacket slid off one shoulder. "I was asleep." "I know." I didn't mean to say that out loud. I know that too. He retrieved the jacket, his expression arranged with considerable care. It's 11:15. There's a car waiting. Did I? Was that the only thing I said? Yes, a pause, just that. Addie gathered her notes with the concentrated efficiency of someone pretending not to be mortified. It was a half-formed thought. It came out fairly complete. Rafferty. The car is waiting, he said, and the deliberate neutrality of his expression was, she noticed, not entirely holding. The quarterly review luncheon was the last event. It was also the one Renfrew attended, uninvited, with two colleagues positioned where Addie would see them the moment she entered the room. He smiled at her across the space, and she understood immediately. He was daring her to flinch. She didn't. She walked directly to the seat beside Rafferty and said quietly, without looking up, "He's here." I know. His people are positioned to observe our reaction. I know that too. Then stop looking quite so composed, or he'll think he's already rattled us. She opened her portfolio. Rafferty said something low. A dry observation about the floral centerpiece that was genuinely funny, and she laughed, naturally, and whatever residual tension had been sitting in her shoulders released by half. 2 hours later, in a smaller room down the hall, Rafferty's solicitor, 2 representatives from the city's oversight office, and every document Addie had compiled across 3 weeks laid out in sequence. The numbered corporation, the original filing, the incorporation documents, co-signed by a junior Renfrew Belfield partner who had since been quietly retired, and the internal correspondence, obtained legally through the solicitor, in which Aldrich Renfrew himself had directed that specific funds be routed through the Dunne Incorporated shell before the paper trail was severed. Her father had not taken anything. The money had moved through a structure designed specifically to make it appear as though he had, and the architect of that structure had been sitting 40 feet away all afternoon, smiling. It was not yet an exoneration. There would be proceedings, reviews, the measured pace of institutions correcting themselves. But it was enough, more than enough, to open a formal investigation. Addie sat in the car afterward and did not speak for several blocks. "You can say whatever you need to," Rafferty said finally. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for a moment. "He went to prison for 3 years. He died 8 months after he was released." Her voice was even. "He never said it wasn't worth it. Not once. Because he believed protecting us was worth anything, and Renfrew planned all of it from the beginning." Rafferty said nothing. He did not offer consolation or optimism, or any of the things people reach for when they don't know what else to say. He drove and stayed present and let the silence be exactly what it needed to be. After a while she said, "That's 9 days." He glanced at her. "What?" 3 weeks is finished. That was the last event." It was. "So the arrangement is over." A longer pause. Technically. He was watching the road with the same deliberate attention he gave everything. Though Renfrew's formal complaint against Dunne Group is still active, and having a documented financial consultant on record would continue to. "Rafferty." He stopped. "Is that actually why you're looking for an extension?" The silence was different this time. "No," he said, "it isn't." "Then say what you actually mean." He pulled to the curb directly in front of her building, a no-stopping zone, an obvious decision to stop there anyway, and turned to look at her. The careful composure, the considered surface, simply gone. "I would like to continue spending time with you, in a capacity that doesn't involve a formal arrangement or a documented invoice," he said. "I'm aware that my company's historical records are entangled with a loss that shaped most of your adult life, and that you have every reason to hold that against me. I'm not asking you to resolve any of it tonight. I'm telling you where I stand." Addie looked at him for a long moment. "You paid for the entire investigation," she said. "Yes. You didn't tell me until after it was finished, so I couldn't argue about it. I've learned when to present information and when to withhold it. That should bother me more than it does." "I know." She picked up her portfolio. "There's a coffee place around the corner that's open until 11. If you want to have a conversation that doesn't have a contract attached to it." He turned off the engine. 3 months later, Bram told anyone who would listen that he had engineered the entire thing from the beginning, that he had selected the Morrison Gala specifically because Rafferty Dunne was on the guest list, had positioned Addie near the East Corridor on purpose, and had anticipated Renfrew's maneuver with extraordinary foresight. None of this was remotely true. What was true was that he had found 2 tickets through a restaurant connection he still refused to name, and had spent that Thursday evening watching his sister do something extraordinary with them. He didn't need to say the second part aloud. Everyone who knew Addie already understood it. The formal review of her father's case concluded 14 months after the luncheon, with a full exoneration. On the day the decision came through, Addie stood in the hallway of Osgood Hall with a piece of paper she kept reading as though it might say something different on the 4th pass, and Rafferty stood beside her and said nothing at all, which was, she had come to understand his particular way of saying the most important things. "You could gloat a little," she told him eventually. "You did help. You found everything, I wrote the checks. You also drove me to 11 different archives at unreasonable hours and didn't complain once." "I complained." "You expressed concern. Those are not the same thing." "Aren't they?" "No, I have notes on the distinction. I'll forward them. I'll read them." He took the hand that wasn't holding the paper, in the matter-of-fact way he had recently adopted for doing this. No announcement, no ceremony, simply a decision made and carried out. "Ready?" Outside, Bram was waiting on the steps eating a granola bar and clearly preparing some remark she hadn't had time to brace herself for. "I've been ready for 9 years, she said. "What's another 30 seconds? He pushed the door open, and they walked out into the October light together, into whatever version of the day had been patient enough to wait for them. Because sometimes the impulsive decisions, the ones made in borrowed clothes in a crowded room, for a stranger you had every reasonable cause not to trust, turn out, against all expectation, to be exactly right.